Hey guys, Wildox Studios here, and today I'm gonna show everybody how old I am. Um, I'm plugging a game that's really old because my Patreon members, by the way, thank you Patreon members, thank you viewers like you who watch my videos, and thank you all of my Discord members who make suggestions on the content that I make. Today I'm gonna be answering a question. And I guess you can just call me the local multiplayer guy, right? Because feels like a lot of the content that I do centers around either split screen or local multiplayer experiences on Unreal Engine. And cool. I'm glad that, I have a decent understanding of Unreal Engine and its nuances and what it expects, that I can, keep something like that going. But anyway, to show how old I am now, when I was a kid, I had a computer, and that computer had multiplayer games, but those games were played a different way, and engines back then were usually homemade, and they didn't have this concept of, they did eventually, but the framework behind engines nowadays expects you to have an input index. Back then you could have multiple COM ports on a computer, but it was pretty rare, and most multiplayer experiences, especially one that's near and dear to me growing up, was Iron Man's Off-Road. And the way that this worked is you would sit around a keyboard with your friends and you would share that keyboard. So player 1 would be on the far left and it would be like A and S, and then player 2 would be G and H, and player 3 would be K and L. And I'm probably hitting some nostalgia for some of your older, the older demographic viewers here, right? You guys probably remember that. And then later on, after DOS Shell, that's pre-Windows, by the way, so yeah, showing my age here. After DOS Shell, you had the invention of the mouse and keyboard, and you had things like COM ports, and then gamepads became a thing. And yeah, nowadays emulators will share those inputs across multiple gamepads, and most game engines are written in a way that they expect a controller index or a separate form of input. And even some game engines now, like Unreal Engine, puts their entire multiplayer framework around replication. Even if it's on the same machine, the back end is handling it as though it's replicating the information instead of it all coming from what I would call, quote unquote, the local machine or local events. So a lot of my couch co-op stuff that I have on Marketplace, a lot of the local multiplayer videos I've done, kind of goes through a lot of this stuff. So some of this will be review. I will be setting up a game mode today. So let's jump over to Unreal Engine, and let's just pick third person, and we'll name this shared local shared keyboard, and let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? So I will set my drive. We'll create this awesome game, by the way. Very fun. So first and foremost, I've gone over this in other videos, but for those of you who don't want to flip around through a million videos, Unreal Engine expects a few things, and it's set up for you in a few ways. If I hit play right now, what's actually happening is the game mode is going to be running some logic in the C++ side. Even though this is a blueprint game mode, it inherits from C++, and the C++ side is going to have some functions. And we'll go open the blueprint editor, and over here on the left, you can see these functions that are all overridable. That doesn't mean these are the only functions the game mode has, but these are the ones exposed to blueprint. And you can override the behavior of what a lot of this is doing. And one of them is handle starting new player and init start spot. Init start spot is basically looking for the player start location. And then there's gonna be the spawn default. Yeah, choose player start. Anyway, all of this logic is going to be handling the way that you spawn and what class that you're going to spawn as. And some of the parameters are exposed over here on the right. Let me do this on the right here, and also here. So your details panel for your game mode and world settings is essentially the same thing that's being listed in the class. And when you hit play, let's go ahead and do that. This third-person character is spawning because the default logic is in C++ is telling it spawn the class that's set as this parameter for default pawn. We don't want that behavior. We want to override that because we want to handle multiple players. So the easiest way to override that is just set it to none. If we hit play, nothing's going to happen, right? So that kind of quickly goes through the way that the game mode works and what this default pawn class does. And then later on, we're going to get into this player controller. Actually, we can do that right now. The player controller class is a pre-made class. If you look for player controller right now, you're not going to find it because it's a C++ based class. There's no blueprint version of it right now. It's relying on its parent. So to do any kind of custom logic, we need to make one. That was the wrong course of events. I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Yeah. Got click happy for a second there. Player controller. So what this means is we've just derived a BP class based on the player controller. I'm not going to spend forever talking about it, but we'll make this shared controller. Let's do that. BP shared controller. And then we can change this to that. And all of the logic, if I was to put the class back to the third person pawn, just to show you guys this, nothing changes because I didn't change anything. If that makes any sense. I changed the fact that I'm inheriting from a player controller without changing any of the child logic, right? And this is going to come into play later because we will need to change some of that logic. So first things first, let's set this back to none on the pawn, and we're going to manually handle the way that works. And again, I've gone over this in other videos. I'm going to do this on begin play. Where I've, incremented the split screen count by the number of player starts in the world. I've done it manually by creating custom classes. I've said, I've done this about 5 or 6 different ways. Today I'm just going to do 2 because it's quick and it's the fastest way for me to get to point A from point A to point B, and also teach you guys something along the way. And then you can increment this, you can build upon this if you want to have 4-player shared keyboard experiences instead of 2. So I'm just going to do a normal for loop, not a for each, but a for loop. And I'm going to say the last index is 1. So that'll give me 2 iterations. Yeah, the quirkiness of Unreal Engine is that it expects a player controller index for every player in order to possess or to do something like set the viewport, set the camera, and pass the controller onto the pawn. We still have to go through those motions, regardless of whether we like it or not. So this is going to be kind of the same thing that we've done in the past, where it's if the index, so we need a branch here. If the index is greater than 0, then we are not player 1, right? We're player 2. At this point, we are going to spawn an actor, and this is where we're manually telling it. Wait, did I pick the right one? Third person character? I did. So we're spawning the third person character. Over here, just because I need something, I'm gonna get all actors of class because I need the player starts. I still want to use that, and I'm just gonna get copy for right now because we know 0 is gonna exist always, and we're gonna get its location or transform. let's go ahead and pin this in. And then we're gonna tell that guy to spawn at this place. Now, we need to create controller, or create local player. Yeah. And this -1 is gonna auto increment. We already have an index 0. The engine does that by default, and a lot of times that confuses people. So you're auto incrementing with a -1 value here. So that means this is going to be index 1, not 0, right? So at this point, we are going to want to possess with this. And the thing we're possessing is this pawn. And then if we are not greater than 0, that means we are actually index 0, or we are get controller of index 0. And that means you are the local machine driven controller, the first instance of it. And we are going to do the same thing. And then we are going to possess. Now, at this point, with this logic, we would be back to like we would be at a place in my other videos where I'm explaining how to get split screen working. We still need this transform. Right. And this is where I tell you that like the engine, the project isn't set up in the best way. It makes some assumptions. Whenever you have this set here, all of this used to work, but enhanced input system with binding of context has introduced some quirks that a lot of people are just like, what is happening? So if we go check out this third person character, and while I'm in here, a little pro tip, I'm gonna do this because I get tired of hitting the Windows key and hitting that stop button. So I'm gonna bind quick game to escape key. This way, if I hit play now, you'll see I could just hit escape and go right back out, right? So just really quick way of not having to finagle around with getting unlocked out of the viewport. So the project makes some assumptions that your third person character is going to exist, or be spawned all the time. That I can cast against the player controller. The controller is going to exist, and the player is going to be here on begin play. The controller is going to exist no matter what, and I'm going to be able to cast against that controller and add this input mapping context. Now, obviously, because you're going to respawn, and obviously because we're handling multiple controller instances, you can't make this assumption. So if you're in a network game or in your multiplayer game at all, the safest thing to do is change this begin play to on possessed. And what that does is it's gonna wait until the pawn is possessed to try to do any enhanced input system bindings, which means that you're not going to end up with a race condition where one of these things isn't ready for the other, etc., etc. Everything in this chain will now flow. And then now if I go back and I hit play, you'll see I have input, like I can actually move around and stuff. So that's one of the first things. The other thing is, as of right now, because we're assigning a second index, I can hit start on a gamepad, and I can use this skip, which was bugged out. So if you're watching this video and you're using anything before Unreal Engine 5.4.1, this is bugged in Unreal Engine 5.3, 5.2, 5.1, and 5.0. Well, it might work in 5.0, but I think the bug was introduced in 5.1. But anyway, if you're not on 5.4.1, this little doodad here will not work, and this behavior will not work. Your controller and your keyboard will always control index 1. But anyway, if you hit that skip and you turn on a controller, like I'm gonna do, Now I have control of the bottom screen and the top screen. Keyboard's on the top, controllers on the bottom, right? So we are back to a place where in my previous videos, we're banging on all cylinders. We're functioning and in the way that Unreal Engine wants us to function. However, we don't want, let me unplug this controller now. We do not want a gamepad. We want to share multiplayer experiences across a single keyboard, right? So, from this point, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to, on the third-person character, create a variable. And this is going to be player, let's do this, controller index. And I'm going to expose this variable, and I am going to expose it on pawn, or on spawn. And then I'm going to refresh this node here, right? Because we want to tell the possessed pawn what the controller index is. If it's not index 0, we need to do something special, because we want to be able to control the controller. We want to be able to control player 2's pawn, which is possessed by controller index 1, with controller index 0. And I know that sounds about as clear as mud. It's but because of the way Unreal Engine expects things to be, that's the way we have to do this. But it's not that hard of a concept to grasp once we kind of go through the motions. So we'll go back to the third person character, and right here, as it's possessed and it comes over and it adds the input mapping, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get the controller index, and we're gonna say if this controller index is greater than 0, that means we are 1. And again, this would iterate through, so this would work for multiple players. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna get all actors of class, and we're gonna look for that BP that we made for the shared controller, right? We're say go grab that shared controller and get copy. We need index 0. We need the first one. And what you could do, I mean, this will happen. This will happen for every iteration past index 0. But you could say if it equals, right? If you only wanted 2 players. So just keep that in mind. And then on this all actors of class for the BP shared controller, what we're gonna do there, and that's why I said this is where this is gonna come in. We're gonna create a pawn reference, a player reference. I want to rename this. This is going to be player 2, right? And this is where, again, third person character object reference. This is where you would need to create a variable for each player reference as you iterate through here. If you're not careful, you can overwrite this with that greater than 0 statement. That's why I mentioned that. So you may want to write a select and then assign references on the select here. So that's one way of handling this. But just keep that in mind. If you iterate through this, every time it goes through the loop, it's going to set this reference. You could end up setting whatever variable, the last variable in the chain, to the same thing over and over and over again. You just need to make sure your logic is sound as you add player 3, player 4, right? Now, since we've done that, I'm gonna get this reference and I'm gonna set it, and we are gonna set the player 2 to self, right? So if my controller index is greater than 0, that is me, that is self, that is this pawn. then I'm going to get the index of the shared controller, which is at 0, the first index, and I'm setting a reference to myself on that controller. And it's like, okay, well, why are you doing all that? It will make sense here in a second. Now, all of that's still there. Everything's good. In the shared controller, if you look at the event graph, we are empty. We are empty. But the shared controller has the capacity to pass input to actors, right? That's what it does. Like I say, shared controller, a controller has that capacity. And now that we have a reference, right, we could do something like if I call a IA jump, which is gonna be the spacebar key, I can at this point call the jump function on triggered, and then if I do cancel, I could do cancel jump. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Jump. Stop jumping. Yeah. So this will be a really quick, dirty example of what I'm saying, right? So if I hit play and look, boom, the space bar key is controlling both references, right? So probably making some sense for you now, right? Obviously, we don't want to do this. We don't want to control both with the IA jump. What this means is we got to go to your enhanced input system, which is going to be here, right? And in your action folder, we're going to make a P2 jump, P2 look, and a P2 move, right? So I will duplicate this. And then I'm going to duplicate this. And then I'm going to duplicate this. So we now have actions for each one of these guys that can then be assigned to separate keys. And where you do the assignment is in the IMC, right? So these are just the actions with the specifier of whether or not they're an access value or Boolean or, you know, that kind of thing. So I'm gonna control shift this, save, and then we'll go open this guy up and we'll look at these mappings. Now you have jump, move, and look, right? What we'll do, we'll go ahead and set up the P2 jump. And easiest way to do this is just copy the settings that are going to be in here for an access value. Because we only care about keyboard events, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the jump for player 2 on the number pad, the 0, which is right next to the arrow keys, right? And then because we need to move, I'm going to make P2 move. I'm going to come down on this and I'm going to say, okay, up, down, left, right is no longer going to belong to player 1. I want up, down, left, right to belong to player 2. So we'll do up, down, left, right. And we have to go set some modifiers. So if we look at this modifier here, it's a swizzle. So we want that same modifier. It should be an XYZ by default, it is. And then S looks like it's going to have a swizzle and a negate. So S is going to be down. And I think left is just negate, if I remember right. So that'll be A. Modifier is just negate, yep. All right, and then right I don't think has anything, so that would be D. Yeah, it doesn't have anything. So that's gonna handle your move. Hit save real quick. And then the next thing is going to be look, right? Now this is gonna be a little tricky because the second player in this split screen setup, we're not top down, remember, we're possessed behind the character. They're not gonna have a mouse. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make it behave kind of like a mouse, but I'm gonna give them the 8, 4, 6, and 2 key numbers on the number pad. So we'll do this. We'll do P2 look. Yeah, and then we'll start adding. So I'll do 8. Down will be 2. 6 will be right. And then 4 will be left. And then we want this to behave just like up, down, left, right. So it's going to be a swizzle, swizzle with negate. And then left is going to be 4. So 4 will be negate. Two is down. All right, so that's done. Now, if we have some issues, something's inverted or whatever, we can come back and correct it later. But now in the shared controller experience, we can take this, or in the shared controller, I don't know why I said experience, as we're passing events off to the shared controller from index 1, we're gonna go grab the P2 jump. And we're gonna make sure that this logic is happening the way we expect. And if I hit jump, it's only on the top. If I hit 0, it's only on the bottom. So we have that working the way that we expect. The next thing is going to be P2 move. No. P2 move. We want the event. Now, the easiest thing to do here, let's just bounce out to the third person character and steal the move logic. So from right, like, let's just do this. Let's copy the whole thing, and we will unselect this, hit Control C, Control V. And if you go back, you'll see that the X and Y value is pinned up top bottom. So we'll shove this right here and we will split this and we'll pull the X and the Y. And then we'll move this over here. And then, yeah, it's gonna throw a little nanny fit. We need to copy this reference. Right, now we have movement on the top, and if I use the arrow keys, we have movement on the bottom. Starting to get somewhere, huh? Now, the next thing is the look. And this process is identical. So we will go copy the look. Go steal that dude style, copy that look. We'll split these. X goes top, Y goes bottom. Don't forget your reference. a little cleaner than what it is. It doesn't really matter, I'm being picky at this point. And then, yeah, mouse moves the top, and then on the far right, the 8, the 2, the 6, and the 4 move the camera for the far right. So it is a little, you know, close together over there on that side, but it's functional. It works, right? And for these kind of shared space, or should I say shared keyboard experiences, you're likely not gonna have camera controls in this way. Oh, something I'm realizing is that did something freak out on me? Hold on. Up, down, left, right. I see what's happening. Yeah. So the mouse is controlling the yaw of the camera here, which is also controlling the forward direction. But the inputs here are rotating the camera around without pushing the axis value or the vector of the actor around. Which that's gonna be like a control, you know, like the player on the controller itself, it's gonna be making the controller yaw and the pitch. Look at the F4 vector direction, and that's gonna either be on the controller setting or on the player setting, right? But for this, again, we can correct that, but for these purposes, it's probably not that important, because again, having a camera viewport in this way with a shared keyboard experience is likely, I mean, there's a way to correct that, but you're not gonna really want to do something like this. Usually if you're doing shared keyboard stuff, you're gonna be doing a camera manager. But for the, you know, the sake of time, I'm gonna cut this short here, but you can update the controller pitch and yaw into the character and correct this behavior, if you want to allow the inputs from the 8, 2, 6, and 4 to pivot the character around as you're walking around. But the inputs are all there, they're all mapped. That's how you would basically wire inputs from a shared controller into multiple player references on a local multiplayer experience. I hope that, you know, this has kind of helped you guys understand like what Unreal Engine expects and how it uses input indices, or, you know, input devices, etc., and assigns those to characters / pawns, and then how those events are being passed on to the reference. So, you know, all we're essentially doing is storing that player 2 reference back into the index 0 controller, and then calling these actions with other keys. That's all we're really doing, where the third person character is calling those actions directly on itself from the possessed controller that's on it. We're using the controller to pass the events on that are specified like this to those actions. It can be a little bit of a mind twist, but that's essentially what's happening here. Yeah, so this is the control oh, that's why this is happening. The control rotation of the controller is what's imparting the movement direction, right? So that's why this weirdness is happening. It's taking the top index control rotation and pushing it into the direction of movement, right? Because of this logic right here. Easily corrected, but just wanted to let you know that I caught it. I figured out what was going on with the input direction, and that's what it is. So you would just do that. And we can test that out real quick. Yep, that's it. There you go. Problem solved. Glad I was able to do that on video for you guys. Yeah. So yeah, don't use the player one's control rotation. And you won't have an issue. But yeah, thank you Patreons, thank you everybody on Wild Studios Discord. Thanks for the suggestions. Thanks for being Patreon members. Hit that like and subscribe button if you like videos like this. And feel free to make more suggestions. Until then, happy coding, toodles.